And we're live. Hi, Corco.
Hey, Dan, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Yourself?
I am doing great. Hold on, my internet popped up a annoying advertisement here. All right, there we go.
Is that typical of Idaho internet?
I've still got that. If you remember back in the '90s, you used to be able to get free internet, and the way it worked was you'd have to sit through like a long, a really good dial-up service. I've still got that, so that's how we're.
You think we're good now?
Let's see. I need to mute something. I think I've got feedback here. There we go. Okay.
All right. I think we're good now. That's a nice jacket you have
Okay.
on. I'm a little intimidated by that. But I
Well,
I can handle it if you can.
I
It's not a
heard
big deal.
I heard that I was going to be interviewed, and I thought, well, let's do this upright. So yeah, I pulled this out of the closet. Nobody's actually worn it since like the '70s, but there we go.
Well, you look fantastic. Um,
Well, thank you. So
so
do you, sir. I love the hat.
isn't it? It's custom made. I got this off of Spreadshirt.com. I have my own account with them. So they print my
No, I mean
logo
that's
on a
really
bunch
cool.
of stuff, and yeah, that's it's nice and easy. So
I mean, that's how you know you made it in the world when you have your own merchandise. Like that's it. That's everybody's dream in life. So good
that's true. When you
for
got
you,
your
man. That's
own,
awesome.
yeah, when you got your own brand like Tiger Woods or Alex Rodriguez, you're all set, man. You know,
For
you
for sure.
you've officially accomplished everything there is to accomplish in life once you have your own Spreadshirt account. But let me take a moment to introduce the guy I'm talking to right now. I have the luxury of sitting down and chatting with one of the foremost members of the road enthusiast hobby. You can see him all over on the AA Roads forum. He basically owns the Mountain West states at this point. And he's certainly a guy who's making a lot of noise in the western half of the country and has ventured to the east side of the country as well and done a few things along the way. So he is the man who everyone who knows him only refers to him by the word Corco, and I'm very happy to have him with us tonight. Welcome in.
Yeah, pleased to be here. That was a far more complimentary introduction than is probably warranted. I'm just a guy who drives some roads and takes some pictures with a pretty shitty camera, whether it's raining or the sun shining right in my face or whatever it is. But I appreciate the kind words.
How did you spend your Sunday today?
So I woke up this morning and I as has happened during these quarantine years, I have started getting out of bed at about 10 in the morning. And I woke up, I had a bowl of cereal. It was Quaker cinnamon toasted oatmeal squares, very delicious with 2% milk. And I'll skip some of these details because this is boring. But
I'm very
what have I done
interested. Yeah,
today
I'm very
is
interested in that 2% milk, by the way. So that's not true.
so it's milk. I don't know exactly how they get the milk fat down to about 2%, and I'm not an expert on dairy by any stretch of the imagination. You can go to the store and you can buy this stuff, and it's homogenized, I guess, and pasteurized, and it's really good. And you should check it out sometime.
You definitely should. But
But anyway,
yeah,
oh no,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Go ahead.
So most of my day today, I was formatting pictures of highways in Utah to put on Corco highways. That was actually my morning. I'm not just saying that for purposes of this interview. I actually did that this morning, and I have a bunch of pictures of Utah that I guess I'll be putting on the internet at some point. But that was my day today.
Is that typically how you spend your weekends? Like if you're not working on your website,
Oh, well,
you're going somewhere taking photos of something for the website. Is that generally how it works with you?
yeah, I've pretty much dedicated my life to this website that like nobody goes to, and that is actually of a very dubious quality. And so I've dedicated my life to this like quantity over quality pursuit of just driving highways and putting very average quality photographs of those highways on the internet. But yeah, normally when we're not all locked in our houses, I like to take a road trip every 3 weeks or so. It's gotten to the point where the nearest unclinched state highway to me is about 240 miles away. And so now I'm actually at the point where I'm flying to places, renting a car for a weekend, and then driving all weekend and then flying back. And so when I started this when I was in college, this was a very cost effective way to get out on the weekends. Now it's become just like a total sink and drain of all my resources. But I keep doing it. So I guess you could call it an addiction. It's probably not much different than smoking cigarettes or something.
Well, except you won't get cancer and die if you just drive around in your car. That is the one upside.
No. But there is some risk of motor vehicle accident or whatever the case may be. But yeah, I mean, it's more fun than smoking cigarettes all day. So,
Yeah. I actually have your website open, and I found something in the first sentence of your about statement that I thought was really interesting. You say, back in 2007, as a college freshman with a love of highways and a car that needed driving, I embarked to drive every mile of state highway in Washington. At that point, a monster was born. Do you really believe that? That, like, when you started doing it and you didn't really know what you were getting yourself into, and now when you look back on it, it became something that was so much bigger than even you could have imagined? Do you really think that?
so yes. So when I remember I was a freshman in college, and I was at the University of Puget Sound at the time, and I spent my first 2 years of undergrad there. And the associated students of the University of Puget Sound had a minivan that you could rent for $20 a day, and this was a highly under advertised service. But anybody, even as an and so
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Reconnecting. That's what happens when you try to interview a guy from Idaho. That's bound to happen at some point. Now, let's see if we can get him back on the line here. Well, anyway.
all right,
Did I get you
am I back?
Yeah, I think so. All right, let's
Okay,
see.
yeah, I don't know what happened there.
I don't know either.
Sorry about.
But we were talking about a minivan that you could rent for $20 a day.
Yeah, so it was a 2003 Ford Windstar, and I realized that I could rent this, and it worked perfectly with like my work study gig at the time, that I could afford to do this, and so I was like, you know what, I want to drive every mile of state highway in Washington, and I told the people in my dorm room hall like, oh, I'm going to drive every mile of state highway in Washington, and they're like, well, you're an idiot, shut up. And at the time, it seemed like an insurmountable like hurdle. It was like, this is going to take the rest of my life, and that's fine, right? Like, it'll be good. And then it didn't. Like driving an entire state highway system actually isn't all that hard. Like it's not easy, but it's not all that hard, right? If you dedicate time and resources to it. And then through college, I kept moving to different states to collect college degrees. And every time I moved to the state, I'd be like, all right, I'll do this. And so yeah, a monster was born. I guess I had no idea that I was going to end up like at some point having like driven the entire state highway system of the Western United States in reach, and so that's where I'm at. And I've told told Doug and Josh and Steve and them that after I finish the West, I'll retire, but I don't know if that's actually true, right? And so yeah, this has become something that, for very little reward, has eaten a massive amount of resources.
Yeah.
But I like it, so I guess it's well worth it, right?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing with a hobby, right? I mean it's something that you do on the
Right,
side that's for fun. So I would imagine that when you started doing it,
right.
there was something about what you were doing that really gelled with you, and it became this, it helped become this big thing that now you're known for.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's one of those hobbies that's sort of like cycles and how interesting it is to people, right? When you're in your to the people that aren't road enthusiasts, right? When you're in your 20s, a lot of people are like, what are you talking about? And it only really appeals to a few people, the folks that are watching this right now, or on AA roads, or that are subscribed to your channel. But then actually, I'm noticing now as you hit your 30s, people with like kids and stuff, they start to think, oh wow, you've got like a really cool side hobby, right? And so that's kind of neat, right? Is that it's something that becomes more interesting to people the older you are when you're still doing it, right?
Mm. It is interesting, yeah. As you mature, maybe there's something to that. Um, when you were starting out with all this stuff and you were first creating your website, um, I would imagine that there were other sites, other road enthusiasts that you were looking at and you were looking up to and you were taking inspiration from um, in the early years. You must have had some of those, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I could talk about that all day. A huge credit to Steve, who I know is reading this right now. His website was a huge inspiration for me. I loved to browse Alps Roads when I was just a pup. HB Elkins' website was a big one for me as well as the OG AA Roads. Back probably, I'm trying to think. I probably discovered that there were pictures of road signs on the internet, and that I was interested in that probably at some point in the late 90s when I would have been 11 or 12. I mean, really, right after like our house got the internet, I stumbled on the stuff going on, and so started taking a look at that, and always just thought, gosh, that was neat. I was one of those folks that could just sit and look at internet pictures of signs forever, and so yeah, I started to sort of copy that model when I started my own website in '07, noting largely that a lot of stuff on the Mountain West wasn't documented, and even the Pacific Northwest, there were some good text websites about highways in Washington State. There's a guy named Mark Bozanich who used to be the WASTA cartographer, and he had a good, really great history of highways in Washington State, but no pictures at all, right? And so it's like, all right, this is something that's fun and a way to kind of contribute to the hobby. We can go back and talk about misc.transport.road. I don't know if you were ever involved in that, but certainly I would lurk. I was probably a bit young to post, and so I didn't do that much. But yeah, no, I mean the whole community just immediately was like, all right, this is the place to be, right?
Yeah, can you just take a second, since you brought it up, to enlighten me about MTR? Because that was way before my time, and I've only heard stories about it, so I don't really know what it was like day to day. But if you could just have the floor for a couple minutes and help explain the awesomeness that MTR was back in the day.
Right, and so I can't provide the experience of somebody who posted and who was really a huge part of that community, but I can give you sort of the third party outsider lurker point of view, which was that it was this amazing free for all cesspool of amazing information combined with people just going at it after each other in a way that only worked in the 1990s internet, right? And so you would see just fascinating information coming out from folks like Steve, like Dan, known as Spooey or NE2, depending on who you are, or even Elkins or CC Slater, or everybody loves Jeremy Lance, and they would put all this great stuff out on the internet, and then also just like beat each other of the shit. And so it was just, as an outsider, it was really fun to read. At the time, I was intimidated. Not a very welcoming community necessarily to make your first post in. So I never really felt comfortable participating too much in the community until the forum came around, just because I was a pup and how many arguments on the internet do you want to get into? But just a fascinating group of people who both love and hate each other. And that's sort of my third party sort of view on that. And I'm sure there's folks in here who participate in MTR and they may agree or disagree with that actual assessment. But that, from my view, that was what it was. And it was just a beautiful monstrosity of amazingness.
So it really wasn't much different from Facebook.
Yeah. I mean, Facebook's kind of turned into that. The nice thing about Facebook is that you have to post under your real name so that people are a little bit less likely to say, like, hey, you're a Nazi, right? Or whatever the case may be. Though MTR, I do believe, was more... it was a higher level of discourse than Facebook, right? It wasn't just you're a Nazi. It was you're a racist for these reasons, right? And so it was a different thing, and I don't want to undersell it, but a beautiful thing. So I don't want to disrespect those that participated in it and enjoyed it, but it's truly something that will never be replaced. And unfortunately, Usenet generally got a pretty terrible reputation as where child molesters are and things like that. And so MTR sort of slid away as that entire news service did, and that was unfortunate. But there we are.
Now,
yep.
You founded your website in 2007. Does your love of roads go all the way back as far as you can remember, or do you think it was something that developed relatively after that?
So, backstory on me is I was born in Columbus, Ohio, and when I was 9 months old, we moved to suburban Chicago, but all of our family was still in Ohio. So my entire childhood, even like Christmas morning, we would wake up at 4 a.m. on Christmas morning to open Christmas presents so that we could be in Ohio by Christmas dinner time, right? And so, at least once a month we were driving back and forth to Ohio, and my dad was somebody who liked to take different routes everywhere he went. I don't know that he's not as obsessive as most of us are, but certainly somebody who likes to drive and likes to explore different things. And so it had to have been rooted in that in some way. My earliest sort of memories are we got a 1994 Rand McNally when I was about 6, and I really enjoyed doing that, and soon assumed the role of navigator on family road trips, and so that's how it started. I remember subscribing to Car and Driver magazine at a young age, and one of my favorite things to do would be to go through the letters to the magazine, where people would write in and whine about whatever article in the magazine, and see where they were from, right? And I would go look them up on the map to see where Cotton Grove, West Virginia is, and then say, all right, like, what would be a fun road trip to get to Cotton Grove, West Virginia? And so it's been baked in me since I was pretty young. And one thing that I always enjoyed was so even like as a kid, I was fortunate to grow up in a safe suburban neighborhood, that's sort of the June and Ward Beaver Cleaver kind of deal, where kids still played outside and you could do that. But my mother had boundaries for me, right? She said you could only go, you were allowed to go to this street over here, this street over here, this street over here, this street over here. And the only times I ever really got in trouble as a kid was I loved to fucking blast through those boundaries, right? And so it would be when my dad was driving down the road, in the dark, looking for like the 7-year-old who decided to ride his bike 3 miles from his house, right? And so, it's been in there since I was a kid, right? And I don't know if that's kind of what you've experienced as a kid. I'd be interested to hear your story. How did you get into it?
Yeah, I think that the map reading thing and the whole, traveling to a lot of places as a kid in the car definitely seems to be a common thread that we all have. Like we can all kind of remember going back to when we were, I don't know, 5, 6 years old, taking trips, hundreds of miles, and yeah, I mean it's similar for me. I mean if you want to get into it, yeah, I mean my memories of traveling to Delaware as a 5-year-old from the Hudson Valley in New York. I mean that's basically the first chapter of my interest in roads right there. So it sounds like you have a very similar story in that regard. How road signs, road trips, road maps. In particular, that was a big thing. And I know that's true for a lot of people who are big on this hobby. So it's nice to know that I'm not nearly the only one who has that similar upbringing.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I always found, when I was little, my world when I was a kid was Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. And so this is probably a little off topic, but my favorite thing was crossing into Ohio, and it was because of the state highway markers. They weren't boring squares, right? And it was like, oh man, look at these, like they've got a state outline for a state highway shield. Like, how cool is that, right? And so that was part of, just sort of like the exoticness of traveling when I was a little kid was. So I guess, yeah, road signs even are baked into the equation in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. I know that when I was a kid, I really liked the New Jersey Turnpike signage. That shield that they have, like I don't know what shape you would call that, but I just loved that stuff when I was a kid. And it was unique, right? Like there was nothing else like that anywhere else. So before they decided to adopt MUTCD, of course, but stuff like that stood out in my mind as a kid really facilitated my interest, down the road. And you see that, of course, with what I do on YouTube, and obviously you have a similar story, and it has resulted in what you do with your website. Absolutely,
and you've done great work. I appreciate how you've moved this into the 21st century a little bit. I was talking as early as '09 about doing videos at some point, and I just never have. Part of it's cheap, part of it's I started this very rigid website structure back in 2007, and I like it, in that it's thorough, and it provides sort of a detailed route log of each highway. But it's also very limiting, right? It's like this is the box that you get to write in, and I've always thought about ways to expand on that or grow that in some way. But then you come into the time constraint, which is all right. Like maintaining that part of the website takes X number of hours, and how many hours do I really want to devote to a website, right? And so I appreciate what you've done in kind of taking this to the next level.
Well, when you look at your website and your body of work, and you kind of reflect back on the totality of it, and you kind of take a step back and you observe the whole landscape that you've covered. In what way is your website your proudest achievement?
Oh, that's a good question. So, I mean, it is definitely... Look, I mean, here's the thing, is it's almost... For me, it's almost not the website so much as the memories associated with it, right? So when I go back and I make these website pages after a road trip, yes, it's a great way to get some content on the internet and share things that are great, but it's also a really fun way, and for me, a good detailed way to reflect back on a trip that I've taken and really nail that into my brain, right? And say, all right, like, I know what Wyoming Highway 296 is now, right? Like it's in there. Right, and so that is, to me, that's the part I'm proudest of, I guess, is that it's allowed a way, at least for me personally, to go back and look at any trip I've taken and really have a good understanding, which comes in handy in all sorts of conversational settings outside of the road enthusiast hobby. But I'm also... Yeah, I mean, I'm proud of the work itself because it's it's complete. It's thorough. Somebody did point out, and I am embarrassed about this, that I am missing a 1 mile, like a half mile of one secondary state highway in Montana. I was planning to go pick that up here in a couple of weeks, but of course it's in like northeastern Montana, like furthest end of the state possible. Now I'm not going to, but will at some point. And so that was kind of, when somebody told me that, it was really disappointing. It was like, oh man, like I put all that work in and it's still not perfect, right? So it's like this perfectionist effort, but when you get it, when you drive that final mile of highway, it's such a good feeling. So yeah.
Yeah. And in what way is your website not your crowning achievement? Like, what's the downside of your website when you look at it?
It's probably the opportunity cost of the hours that I've spent updating it, right? So it's had I not been doing that, what would I have been doing? And here's the thing is, in my mind, I can come up with all sorts of really productive things that I would have done, but I probably wouldn't have actually done them. I probably would have just been sitting on TV watching The Office again, or whatever it is that people do with their time, right? And so, so I am actually proud of that I've channeled much of my free time into something that provides some use to some people, right? Which is, I think, more than a lot of folks can say. But alternatively, maybe I would have used that time doing something better. You know what? Maybe I would have a girlfriend, right? or something like that, right? And so it's it's you can never really. It's hard to look back on your life and judge. Was this time used in the best way possible? All I can do is look back and say, all right, this is what I did, and I think I can sleep comfortably knowing what I used my time on, right? If we're being realistic about it. It is relaxing. Going through formatting photos, putting them on the website. It's not something that I view as like work. It's not hard to motivate myself to do it, and so I feel like that time probably would have been used doing something less useful anyway. So that's good.
Do you think about the technology aspect of it too? Because since you started in 2007, and I think you've alluded to this already, but we've gone through quite a big change in terms of what's available to us. We had cameras back in 2007. Now we've got even better cameras with even better resolution. We've got video. We've got 4K video. We've got drones. We've got live streaming. All these features that have really come about in the last few years that were not available to us when we started. And I just wonder if you've thought about diving into some of that yourself, as far as...
So, yeah, I mean, I've thought about it, and as this technology becomes increasingly affordable and available, I probably will start to do it. It's really hard to break me away from I'm one of those old school people that kind of gets spun around the wheels on change sometimes, and so I kind of want to stick with the format that I'm doing. I sort of committed myself to that, rightly or wrongly, but I would love to find some way to add to it that uses some of that technology. Maybe in addition to having my camera where I take my shitty pictures of signs, whether I'm driving west into the sun or wherever it is. But also have a camera rolling at the same time that maybe I can post a video as well or something to that effect. I would love to get into that. For me, and this is where it sort of fails, right? And it gets back to being a labor of love as opposed to a popularity, right? And for me, it's like, man, I could go spend $400 on that fancy new camera, or I could take another trip, right? And it's like, how do I balance that? And so, yeah, I would love to get to a point where I'm doing things in a more 2020 sort of fashion and drive up hits. I don't know what your goal is with your channel, but I've always thought that it would be awesome to figure out how to make it some sort of source of actual income, right? If I could offset some of the costs of taking trips by providing value to people in some other way. If that's an achievable outcome like that, that would be great. But I also don't want my site to be like top of ads everywhere. So
yeah.
But
Yeah, I do think that, what you and I do, we are as prolific as we are in our respective fields. Um, you do kind of back yourself into a corner after a little while because, you're used to doing everything in one format, right? But as technology keeps evolving,
Right.
you have to start wondering, should I switch equipment? Should I switch the way that I film things? Should I incorporate photography into my page? Should I not do that? And all this other stuff. And I think I really reached a crossroads myself about a year ago where I was thinking, maybe I should start thinking about upgrading my video camera equipment. But then I thought, well, that's not really going to work because it's not going to jive with the stuff that's already been uploaded, so it's going to be an inconsistent presentation across different areas, and I want everything to be united and unified, and I want my viewers to have the same presentation for everything, if for no other reason than for consistency's sake. Because I want
Absolutely.
people to know exactly what to expect per video. And I have been able to experiment with some of that other stuff. Live streaming has become a satellite operation for me. It's obviously become a lot more prevalent these days with what's going on in the world, shall we say. Um, so, it's kind of the back and forth, the give and take that you have when you have a site that is really there as a passion and not necessarily there as a means of making money, for example.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and I don't know where the balance is because I feel like if you overly commercialize it, then you're no longer doing it for a passion. I mean I don't know how your brain works, but I'm one of those people that as soon as I feel like I have to do something, I don't really want to do it anymore. Right? Whereas if I'm volunteering to do it, then it's great. But
Yeah, yeah. But I also feel like, you hear the term necessity is the mother of invention, right? And we've been dealing with unprecedented times across the country right now. And the fact that I'm able to join you right now, from where you are in your beautiful corner of the world, we probably would never have thought of trying that a few weeks ago. So, finding opportunities and finding ways to incorporate new ideas and new things into what we do, I think is very important as we go forward. We may not want to change the base elements of what we do, but these are good times to experiment with things, see what works, see what doesn't work. Because it all, when you put it all together in the memory bank, you can use it to your advantage, no matter how it worked out.
no, I mean I think you're absolutely right, and I will say, and this is thinking real small. My quarantine goal is to migrate Corco Highways to a mobile-friendly site design, right? So I'm all the way back in like 2012. There we go, right? But but you guys, but I think that's the first step to doing anything more major and more significant. I but I fully agree with you. This is a wonderful opportunity that we all have with we can't necessarily do what we love, but what I think we all love doing, which is going out and hitting the roads and taking trips and traveling. But we can think about other ways to be creative and spread our wings in that way. And I think it's great for all of us. And hopefully, yeah, this is hopefully a once in a lifetime opportunity that we've got right now, and to the extent that we can take advantage of it, that's a beautiful thing.
So I was looking at your site, and you mentioned that you moved around quite a bit during your college years to, as you said before, collect degrees. So you started in Washington, right? And then you migrated to a couple other places along the way. And by that point, as you're moving around, I'm assuming by that point you've said to yourself, okay, I've got Washington under control, so hey, maybe this isn't so bad. Maybe I'll try this in other states. Like, walk me through those first couple of years there as you were, like you had Washington as your goal, and then you had, I don't know, Idaho as your goal, and then you had Montana as your goal. Um, was there really any evolution in your thought process during those years, or did you just say, you know what, I'm in a new state, I'm gonna go get it, and that's that?
Well, yeah. So when I started in Washington, I was in Seattle, obviously, and about 2 years into my time at Puget Sound, I realized it was kind of when the economy started to crash. Puget Sound is not the cheapest school in the world. I was watching people get out with my degree and go work at Blockbuster Video, which not all that successful. So the economics of it were really like, this isn't the right place to be right now. And so it just so happened that all that occurred to me right as I was finishing Washington. For like a month, there was gray area, and I thought, all right, well, I'll just get started on Oregon now that I'm done with Washington, right? But what ended up happening was I looked into transferring to the University of Washington. They were like, we don't really want you, and that was disappointing. It kind of odd because my grades were fine, but ended up at the other UW, University of Wyoming, and so I moved there, and logically that's where I went next. I happened to finish up Wyoming right as I was applying to grad schools and not sure where I was going, and so it looked like I was actually going to end up moving to Nebraska. And so if you go onto my site, I've actually driven almost all of the Nebraska Panhandle. So I was like, all right, well, I'm moving to Lincoln, and that's what's next. So while I live in Laramie, Wyoming, it's going to be way easier to get the Panhandle. So I've driven almost all of the Nebraska Panhandle at this point, but then I actually ended up going down to the University of Arizona, and so that was sort of the next stop, and that was a whirlwind. I was working graveyard shift and going to school full time, and driving highways where I can. And fortunately, Arizona has a shockingly small state highway system for a state of its size, so I was able to squeeze that in with everything else I was doing. So that was nice, and happened to finish up right as I got a job in Montana. And actually, I clinched Montana from Idaho, or I clinched Idaho from Montana. So when I started in Deer Lodge, Montana, and moved to Helena, and those are both sort of on the southwestern side of the state. And Idaho is actually easier to do than Montana from Montana. And so I clinched Idaho while working a little bit on Montana, and then I clinched Montana. Then I moved back to Boise. But by then I'd already clinched Idaho, and so by then everything broke, right? And so I went back to Oregon because that was nearby, and then it was like, all right, well, what next? And I looked at Utah, but my thinking on Utah was I don't want to clinch Utah because, as Tom knows, who's reading this right now, like there's so many like institutional state highways and dumb things like that where you can't even really. It's impossible to claim a true state highway clinch of Utah because there's so many roads behind locked gates and things like that are on the state highway system. So it's like, all right, screw that. And all the button copy in California is getting replaced, and I want to see that before it all goes away. So I'm going to do California and Nevada. And so that's been my focus the last few years, has been California and Nevada. But at that point, most of my trips now are actually getting on an airplane, flying to Los Angeles, driving as much as I can on the weekend, and then flying back. Because I have this weird goal of not using any vacation time while doing all this, which is totally you with me?
I was losing you for a second there, yeah. But yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we left off at you're trying not to use any vacation time for any of this stuff.
Yeah, so that was kind of basically my last sentence, right? So I try to only do this without using vacation time, so I can use vacation time to go other places, and so it's not the most efficiency's been thrown out at this point, right? And so what I've done now is started to plan all trips in advance. And so that's actually kind of what I'm working on right now is once I finish California and Nevada, which I'm hoping I'll finish this year, assuming we're let out of our house at some point, I'm going to start on Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah. So what I've started doing is planning every single clinching trip I'll need in advance to try to get them as efficient as possible. And then I've got 20 or 30 or whatever drives on the shelf, and I can just pull them off as it makes sense to do them, and that's how I did California and Nevada, and that seemed to work pretty well. So
Wow.
it's no longer at a point where this is like a easy day trip hobby. It's become something, as you said earlier, a monster.
Yeah.
Still fun, but fortunately, I'm in a place where I can do all this. But who knows? Things can change. So that's where we are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you and I are both in the same boat in that we each had this point in time where our little hobby exploded into this huge, out of control thing that became its own, massive thing that we now have no control over, and we're simply along for the ride at this point. Um, what was that moment for you? Like, was there a moment when you looked at what you were doing and said, man, this has the opportunity to be something really special?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say, when I was kind of in school and hopping from state to state, I didn't have that feeling. It was just sort of like, this is a good way to get out some weekends, de-stress, see a little bit of the state that I'm going to school in, right? It was probably when I lived in Montana, and maybe even after that. No, it was probably when I lived in Montana that I began to realize, and this came in two phases, right? So when I was in Montana, I started to drift away from like, all right, I'm going to do balls to the wall. I'm going to drive 14 hours a day. I'm going to bust this out, right? It became, I actually kind of want to see some of these states that I'm driving through, right? Like, so I'm going to cut it back to an average of like 6 to 10 hours a day of driving, right? And stop and see some stuff, right? And so that hit me in Montana and Idaho. But at least at that point, I was still in like day trip to overnight trip range. I think once I started on California and Nevada, that's when I realized, like, all right, I'm committed to this. All right, like now I'm getting on airplanes to fly to Los Angeles to drive highways, right? And so, and so I think at that point, that's when I realized, like, all right, like this is your life, and you like it, and so that's great. And I don't know, when did you hit that point, Dan?
Um, Probably the first trip I took to Florida. This was in 2015.
Okay.
And up until that point, it was a nice little cottage industry where I was focusing pretty much exclusively on the Northeast Corridor, Boston to DC. And I had done some stuff outside of there, like I had been out to like Cleveland and Pittsburgh, I had been up to Maine, and I had been down to like Hampton Roads in Virginia. But that was basically it. That was my little, you know, corner of the world. And so um, I think when I drove to Florida in 2015 and was able to add all the cities in Florida that trip, that's when I realized that this could be something more than a regional thing. This could be a national thing, an international thing, a continental thing. You know,
Absolutely.
because what I did clearly was able to translate anywhere else that I took it. So at that point, it was really a matter of just figuring out how far I wanted to go with it. And the channel has definitely evolved a lot over the years. You know, it went from being this really little thing that was a tribute to my own personal favorite drives as a kid to now being, holy crap, I'm going to every single major metropolitan area in North America. You know, like that, somewhere along the way it changed. And I think that that trip in 2015 really started to change things for me.
Yeah, no, I mean that's crazy. I mean, you're up to? Well, it looks like 11,200 subscribers. I mean, that's like that's like a small city. That's like that's I think the ninth largest city in Wyoming is only 11,200 people. So you're like, yeah, I mean that's 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 significant.
That is true. I've got an Idaho-sized city following me now. I like that. You know what? I'm gonna put that up on my page later today. That's a good one. Um, but there's one other state that I want to talk about with you because it was the state that I was born in, and
Okay.
it is a state that is very much an outlier for you when I look at your website and I look at your resume. Because the states that you've clinched in full are mainly in the Mountain West, the Pacific Northwest. But there's one outlier on that list that I really got to talk to you about, and that is Delaware. Um, Take me through the process of, what made you decide to do that in the first place, and walk us through what that trip was like for you.
So, and actually, maybe this is to answer your earlier question. Maybe this is when I realized that this was something real. Was I in 2014 or 2015 or so? I looked at the calendar and I said, all right, if I want to drive every mile of state highway in the United States before somebody takes my driver's license away, I'm going to need to bust out about one state a year. And I realized, all right, I'm done with Idaho. I'm not going to be able to finish Montana this year because Montana's got a surprisingly, with all the secondary highways, it's a fairly large system with a lot of unpaved roads, and so it takes a while to clinch. But so what I decided was, all right, what's the easiest state to clinch that is not that I can do, right? And so I looked at it, I was like, all right, I think I can clinch Delaware in a reasonable amount of time. So just to stick to a state a year average, we're gonna fly to Delaware and we're gonna do it. And so I actually flew to New York and spent a couple days there, and then or actually, no, what? How did I do that? No, it was tied to I held a road meet. This was smart. I held a road meet out in Denver that all the East Coast people came to that I knew at the time, and so I flew to the East Coast to go to Denver to go to Delaware. So I would have just like dedicated time just to drive Delaware state highways, right? And so did that over the course of a few days. Stayed with Laura and Mike, who I know are around here. My last day, as soon as I finished, thank you guys again for the hospitality, and then flew back out to Denver, and we had a road meet, and it was a great it was a great thing. But yeah, no, I mean the thought process was really just how do I make sure I'm finishing one state a year, and so now,
yeah, so I know that Delaware is probably a state that you, up until the point that you decided you were going to clinch it, you probably knew next to nothing about, or you had no real impressions of what it was like. First impressions, what were your thoughts on the state in general, state highway system, stuff along those lines? I mean, obviously you're coming from a far different part of the country, so you might have a completely different set of expectations of what to expect. But what were your impressions of that part of the country?
So before I even left, right, I had to map this out, right? Like I had to plan the drive, right? Like how am I gonna do this in something of a reasonably efficient way? And so, I'm making random guesses on how long driving is going to take, and I'm trying to guess average speeds. And I asked, folks, like Steve and Anthony and Laura, like, all right, like how long is it actually going to take to clinch Delaware 141? What kind of average speeds can I assume, especially north of the canal there, and try to figure that out. But when I actually entered Delaware, it turned out to me that the most efficient way to do it was to come in on US 9, so on the Cape May ferry. And so, first state I've ever entered the first time by sea, right? And so, so my first entry into Delaware was from a boat, and got off the boat there and drove a little bit around the south side. And my initial impression was, wow, this is nice. And then I got to, I guess it's Delaware 1B, where Rehoboth Beach is that correct?
Yeah, 1B, yeah, right.
And yeah, and I was like, wow, there's a lot of people down here, because it took quite a while to clinch it just with the traffic and the pedestrians and all that, and so that was nice. And then the next day, or that night, I stayed in Salisbury, I think, Maryland. And oddly, I mentioned this yesterday, I didn't spend a single night in Delaware. My entire Delaware clinching efforts. It just so happened I was always right near a city in Maryland at the time. But so the next day, I largely just hightailed up US 13 in the morning and went up to Wilmington, and at that point was just sort of struck by. First of all, there's one spot in US 13 where it parallels the Delaware 1, and you've got so US 13, which is a divided highway, and it's paralleling Delaware 1, which is a divided highway. And I'd never seen anything like that before, and I thought that was kind of odd. Like here's a divided highway paralleling a divided highway. You've got like 4 carriageways of traffic right here.
Yeah.
And so I think that's right around the canal there, and then up to Wilmington, and some of the state highways there, 2 and 4 and whatever, go up into downtown Wilmington, and I'm not used to sort of older industrial East Coast cities, right? And it's just kind of fascinating, and when you're from Idaho, you're a little bit sketched out, right? Like the signs are a little dingy, and everything's fine, but it's a very different cultural experience than you're used to, and it's like, this is kind of run down. This is a very different. We don't have some of the old architecture and some of the old, just like 100-year-old neighborhoods out here in Idaho, or really anywhere in the Mountain West, right, where folks have been and lived there for a long time, and so the sort of architecture and all that was neat, but also kind of intimidating at first. But I like Delaware. One thing I really noticed immediately was, I think Delta must have some, like, when a town says, hey, we want to be like a historic downtown, Delta has like a template, like historic street light fixture that they put up, and it's in every single city that seems to have a historic downtown. And it looks nice in one individual city, but once you see them everywhere, it's like, man, have some creativity, guys. And so
yeah,
I think that was interesting to me. It was sort of like looking at how the DOT there is uniform and adapts to different locations.
Yeah, because I think one of my early memories as a kid was I was like 7 to 10 years old when they were building Route 1 from near Wilmington on south through Dover. And so it seems like every time I was down there visiting family, we would take a little side trip over to see the construction. And of course the bridge over the canal was being built. That was in the mid-90s. So I was about 6 or 7 when that was built. There's a lot of memories there too for me from an early age. That kind of led to me being the engineer mess that I am today. But so you definitely got.
I didn't realize that part of Delaware.
What's that?
I said I didn't realize that part of Delaware 1 was that new, because isn't it all? Aren't the exit numbers all in kilometers?
Yeah. So the idea was that Route 1 was going to be a pilot for an eventual conversion of the whole system to kilometer posts, and then they never went through with it. Actually, the original section of it up near 95 was originally posted in miles, but then when they extended the freeway all the way down towards Dover, they renumbered everything at kilometers. They realized that the switchover was never going to happen, so they actually put mileposts back on Route 1, but they kept the exit numbers as kilometer-based. So you have this really weird hodgepodge of mileage and kilometers that doesn't make any sense when you look at it initially, but that's kind of what happened. Route 1 was mainly constructed in the 90s, and the last section opened in 2003. So, at least to get you as far south as Dover. They've made a lot of improvements in the last few years to get you between Dover and Rehoboth, but the main turnpike, the toll road that you now got to see, was built in the last 20 years or so.
Gotcha. No, that's see that. I mean, it's interesting that they were making metrication efforts as late as the 90s. I wouldn't have guessed that. That's kind of a little bit later than, kind of, by that point most places had kind of stopped doing that. So that's kind of neat.
Yeah, and now you need to go back. Now you need to go back to Delaware because there's the US 301 toll road, which opened up. What was that, last year? 2 years ago? Something like that. Yeah. So now there's a brand.
Yeah, that's right. I need.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, I need to get back. I kind of made a vow to myself that I would never that I would enter Delaware for the first time to clinch its state highway system and then never return. But I probably need to go back and clinch that, so I may need to break that rule. I still haven't been to. I've been to 48 states, and I'm missing Connecticut and Rhode Island, so I can still maybe with Rhode Island, I can hold that to be the goal is to enter at one time just to drive the state highways and then never come back.
Because that's really, so the only two states you're missing are Connecticut and Rhode Island. Those seem to be pretty random states to not have. I would have expected you to say something like Alaska and Florida or Hawaii, but you've got the hard ones out of the way, and you're missing the state that's 20 minutes east of me and a state that's about 2 hours east of me. So that's interesting.
Yeah, it always blows the minds of you East Coasters when I say that. Yeah, it's because those states are really they're out of the way, right? So I've been to Massachusetts a couple times. I've even driven from Massachusetts to Idaho before. I've been to New Hampshire, I've been to Vermont, but Connecticut and Rhode Island are really, if you don't live in the Northeast, they're kind of out of the way unless you're actually trying to go there, right? Or you're driving from New York to Boston or something, which I guess I've never had to do. But yeah, no, Alaska I've done, and there's a few folks that went with me to Alaska in the chat right now, but never have made it to Connecticut and Rhode Island. One day I will, but that's that.
What was the occasion for Alaska? Wasn't there a meet up that way at some point in the past?
Yeah, there was a meet up that way, and this might be fun to tell the story. So it was kind of the Alaska road meet. So I've got a couple cars, but one of my cars is it's a 2002 Jeep Liberty, and so it's getting old. And even a couple of years ago, it was fairly old. But I said, you know what, this is the perfect time to drive that car off the Dalton Highway, right? Because it's fairly low value. I don't really care if it gets dinged up and on the gravel, and it's still reliable enough to make the trip, right? And so I met Steve and Anthony in Fairbanks, and so drove all the way up there fine. And I had gotten the car serviced; it was ready to go. It had one little thing, and I never even thought that it would be an issue. The emergency brake didn't quite work, right? So you pulled the e-brake and it didn't work, and so I thought, all right, like no problem there, right? Like didn't even consider that would be an issue, right? And so we get up north of the Arctic Circle there, and we're alternating drivers, and I think I don't remember. I guess Anthony drove first, and then he parked the car, and then Steve drove. And apparently in Connecticut, it's state law to set the emergency brake or something when you drive when you park a car. And so Anthony dutifully set the emergency brake, no fault of his own. And then but somehow by doing that, it blew out the brakes entirely in the car just by setting the brake. So we had to drive the last 100 or so miles up the Dalton Highway with no brakes. And I've driven with no brakes before. It's not a big deal. And once you come down off the north slope there, it's just a flat road, right? And you can see pretty far. And so even with no brakes, you can stop from 45 miles an hour, right? And the road's a little snowy, but that's okay. And so we roll into Dead Horse, Alaska there, and immediately go looking for a mechanic. We can't find anybody. The next day we do find somebody, and they're like, well, obviously we don't have a drum brake kit for a 2002 Jeep Liberty just chilling up here in Dead Horse, Alaska. Nobody up there has that light duty of a truck. They're all driving Silverados or whatever the case may be. And so at that point, Anthony and Steve were like, all right, well, fuck this. we need to get back. So they caught a plane back to Fairbanks, and so I had to stay up there an extra night, wait for a brake kit to get flown in from Fairbanks, I guess, and they put it on. It ended up being the world's most expensive drum brake job. And then we drove back, and so it was a fun experience. It was definitely expensive, but also a good story. So a couple of years later, it's fun to laugh about. At the time, it was pretty stressful, but now it's kind of fun to look back on and be like, that was kind of fun. So I enjoyed it since I had the luxury of driving up instead of flying up like those two did. I had the extra time to chill out there for an extra day and make it happen. But yeah, I enjoyed it. In hindsight, I don't know what I would have done differently. Drive a newer car, I guess, or don't. Yeah, I don't know what the solution would be. So, but it was a good time. The Dalton Highway is it's doable. Like you can do it in a modern crossover SUV without 4-wheel drive, right? And yeah, as Scott just Anson just said, drive a Silverado. That's really the thing to drive for safety. Even the guy at the mechanic, he was like, if you had a Silverado, you'd be on the road already. And so that's a very good point.
We're talking with the man known as Corco, who is the webmaster of corcohighways.org, and he's kind enough to join us and spend a little time with us on this Sunday afternoon. So the Dalton Highway, for those of you who aren't familiar, let's kind of paint the picture a little bit here. The Dalton Highway is what? It runs from Fairbanks to, is that the one that goes all the way up towards the Arctic, up that way?
Exactly. Yes. So it goes from Fairbanks across the Arctic Circle up to Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, which is the northern terminus of the Western Hemisphere contiguous road network. So if you start in Idaho, you can't possibly drive a car any further north on a road. And so that's where it is. It's it's a pretty drive. It's more of it is paved than you would expect at this point. I thought it was probably a good 40 to 50% paved. It's really especially south of the mountains, but it was really a pretty drive. The first southern, it's about what is it? It's 400 to 500 miles. So the southern couple hundred miles are largely Alaskan forest, right? And they're pretty, but then you get to the really cool part, which is the North Slope Mountains. So there's an east-west mountain range across northern Alaska called the North Slope, and really beautiful. At that latitude, there's no trees. There's just a lot of snow, and just some truly impressive peaks, and a really beautiful pass called Adigan Pass that you go over, and then you come down the pass, and you are in a different world, right? It's there's no vegetation. It's flat. It is. You really do feel like you're at the edge of the world, or you're in Antarctica or something, and it's really a beautiful, and actually I wouldn't even say beautiful. It's just a unique drive, right? It's you can't see that landscape anywhere else on the road, right? And then you get up there, and you're so far north that the sun doesn't set, and so you get out at 2 in the morning just to look at the sun still in the sky, and I highly recommend doing it. Just make sure your car is 100% in good shape, especially if you're rotating drivers around, and make sure. We were fortunate we didn't have any tire issues, but we did have 2 full-size spare tires, and I would suggest that for anybody who drives it, because if you do get screwed out there, you're screwed. So.
But you don't have that problem in Idaho, right? As far as remoteness, I think you said once that there's a lot of protected wilderness area in Idaho that's the highest per capita of any state in the country. But is that right? Do I have that roughly correct?
Yeah. Yeah, so aside from Alaska, more of the state of Idaho is in federally protected wilderness. Now, the thing with federally protected wilderness, though, is there aren't roads in and out, right? There's US 12 cuts across between the Frank Church and the Subway Wilderness, but there's really no other roads through the wilderness areas, right? So that being said, Idaho is very remote in places. Montana is really especially if you ever set out to drive every mile of state highway in Montana, that's where you really need to probably also follow the 2 spare tire advice, just because a good 40 to 50% of Montana's secondary state highways are not paved, and you're really out in the middle of nowhere for a lot of those, and sometimes they're in fairly dicey condition. So that's probably the most sort of remote I've been. Nevada is very remote, but fortunately their system is entirely paved, and so that makes it not as treacherous or at much risk with tire damage. I remember a few years ago, when I was finishing up Montana, I'd rented a car to drive, and I'd rented a Ford Explorer to drive some unpaved state highways, and got a flat tire out near the port of Whitetail, or not the port of Whitetail, the port of some fish. I don't remember where it is, but it's northwest of Havre. It's an unpaved state highway that crosses from Montana up into Alberta, and I got a flat tire there, right? And so I had this Ford Explorer only had a donut, so I had to limp a Ford Explorer with a donut all the way back to Helena, which wasn't a pleasant experience at all, given that it was a Sunday and so no tire places open, and Hertz wanted to charge more money to drop it in Great Falls, which is about halfway between where I was and Helena. So at that point I learned the lesson to just take my own car, right? But yeah, it's a fun driving state highways in the West. Is the more remote ones is an adventure, and yeah, you've always got to be ready for whatever may happen.
That's true. Single favorite drive in the state of Idaho would be what, if you had to pick?
So before I lived in Boise, before I went off to college, I lived in McCall through high school, and I maintain that Idaho 55 from Boise to McCall early in the morning before all the tourists are out and the roads relatively empty. That's a beautiful drive, and I can't recommend that one enough. Now, that being said, given that most of the day that road is not all that pleasant because it's sort of Idaho's only road. If you look at a map of Idaho, there's Idaho 55 goes up to McCall, and then north of Idaho 55, there's only one road connecting northern and southern Idaho. There's not even a way to get from northern to southern Idaho on back logging roads. There's no way to get from Boise to Lewiston within Idaho without touching US 95 at some point. So where was I going with that? But I guess the point is that means that 55 and 95 get quite a bit of traffic. I really like, as far as, so Idaho has two very different kinds of scenery, right? There's the mountainous, foresty type, but then there's the desert scenery. And so for mountainy, foresty scenery, Idaho 14 out to Elk City is a really pretty drive. It's just kind of a long dead-end spur from northeast to Grangeville out to Elk City, and that's a gorgeous drive. And then in southern Idaho, out in the desert, what would I say is the prettiest? I really like, I would go with probably 2026 from Bliss, or they catch each other in Carrier Shoshone, northeast of Bliss. But then when you follow that drive out towards Craters of the Moon and Arco and out towards DuBois and Idaho Falls, that's a beautiful drive. You get to see Craters of the Moon. You get to see wide desert highway, and it's actually, if you're driving from Montana to Idaho, it's faster than going 15 to 86 to 84 to get from Montana down to Boise. So definitely, if you're ever driving across the country, that's a beautiful route to take. More interesting than 84, and doesn't move much slower because there's really no towns and the speed limit's 65.
Okay, we're taking your questions in the live chat if you have them for Corco. CL94 wants to know what your favorite state clinch has been so far, and you get bonus points if you say Delaware.
So I'm not going to say Delaware.
Darn.
It depends on what your motives are again, right? So I'm going to answer with two states, which I probably shouldn't. I really enjoyed Montana because of the diversity of it, right? You've got Montana itself is an incredibly diverse state. You've got a lot of clinching the secondary state highway system in Montana is just fun because you're on these random dirt roads in the middle of nowhere with like occasionally beautiful scenery and ranches and all sorts of things like that. Now that being said, I've also really enjoyed clinching California thus far. I'm about 85 to 90% of the way done with California at this point, and um, that offers more from sort of the road enthusiast perspective in terms of just interesting infrastructure. You've got a cool mix of some of the biggest cities in the world with just like rural California 2-lane roads are so fun because they don't really make any effort to grade them or anything like that. And so you've got these like up and down, just twisty roads that are just real driver's roads where you can just, there's no traffic and you can just kind of haul ass to the extent that you can. And the only time I've ever made myself car sick in a car while I'm driving is in California. Just driving either my own car or rental cars and just pounding them as hard as I possibly can around some of those twisty roads with no traffic whatsoever. And so I love that, right? Get off the interstates and some of the really major state highways. There's really nobody out there, and it's kind of fun.
Killer's opinion. Next time you're coming back to the South, especially Louisiana, and before you answer that, I have to say that I can highly recommend Louisiana as a state that you should definitely look into and explore. Because on 2 separate winter trips in 2017 and 18, I basically had a field day in Louisiana, and I loved it. And I strongly recommend it. I can't recommend it highly enough for you to get to know the state a little bit more in the future. So, putting you on the spot with this question.
No, I mean I've had the good fortune of taking a couple trips to Louisiana. I've clinched US 371, the new one. I've been up some combination of like 34, 167, 34, and various other roads through some of the forest of Louisiana. I've been to New Orleans. I would love to get back. The next trip to the South will be somebody schedule a road meet down in the South. I think this year, fortunately, with this coronavirus thing, I'm going to have some spare PTO. So, if somebody wants to schedule something down in the South, I'm happy to come down and make a 4 or 5 day weekend out of it. I'm probably not going to go to San Antonio, Wisconsin. I like that idea, but I have a feeling we're not going to be fully up to speed by then, but maybe.
Yeah. I think when we were talking about the Dalton Highway, we were talking about Prudhoe Bay, and that's where Barrow is, correct? Isn't that the same?
So Barrow's actually no. So Barrow's actually like 120, 150 miles west. I have never been there. Anthony and Steve had the good fortune of connecting there, actually, or stopping over there when they decided to fly back. I would be interested in exploring more of Alaska. I would love to get back, but yeah, I mean, it's probably getting to those places because there's no roads in or out. I need to find a specific reason to head out there. Yep.
We didn't really talk much about this, but your profession in the urban planning realm, and Laura asked a really good question. How do the two relate? Your profession versus your hobby. Is there any crossover there? Is there any, or do you do a good job of managing to keep them separate for the most part?
So a lot of what I have to do as a planner, and as a lot of planners do, is we're advocating for alternative modes of transportation, right? And so a lot of what I'm doing is trying to push, like, one interesting side note in Boise and Ada County, Idaho, is this is the only arrangement like this in the country, but every road in Ada County, whether it's in a city or not, is operated by the Ada County Highway District, which is an entirely separate governmental entity with its own elected officials, its own taxing authority. So the city of Boise has no city streets. The other cities in Ada County have no city streets. No matter where, any street you're on in Ada County, Idaho, you're on an Ada County Highway District controlled street. And so that creates a lot of tension between some of the cities and the Highway District, where the cities, especially Boise, are very much trying to encourage bike ped and buses and things like that, where ACHD is the way the statute was written, they are required to put the car first, right? Like they are a motorist supported organization, right? And that's written in the state law, their existence, and so they don't have a lot of flexibility to change that. And so a lot of what we have to do as planners is kind of push back on engineers on come on guys, like do you really have to do this, right? Like can we I know it's not the 85th percentile speed, but like there's a lot of bikes on the speed lower, right? and so I've done a good job separating, right? Because on the one hand I've got this hobby which is just like driving cars all the time, but my actual, less so now, but a big part of my job is saying like, hey, like bikes, pedestrians, like let's get people out of their cars, right? So I'm a little bit of a walking contradiction in that regard, because I love my car and I love driving.
Yeah.
But that's it's helped me keep them separate and look at those as two totally separate things. So I guess that's a good thing, you know.
Is it, you love driving, right? But at the same time, in your profession, you're advocating for other modes of travel. Is that a challenge for you at times, or do you find it pretty simple to keep the two separate? Because I know that depending on who you are
So
and
I
what
think
your interests are, it may not be as simple to do that. But you seem to be able to compartmentalize and do your job very well, in spite of the fact that you're interested in something that you're really trying to advocate against in a certain respect.
so I mean I guess I'm able to filter it in the way that I don't want to get too controversial here, but the way I can look at it is, all right, like if I'm in the city of Boise and I'm going to work, and if there's a way for me to get to work in something that isn't a car roughly as efficiently, like that's great, right? That to me that's a totally separate conversation from like, do I enjoy driving from Boise to McCall on the mountain road, right? And so, or driving, the interstate system, right? It's to me, I enjoy driving. I don't necessarily enjoy commuting that much, right? And so I guess that's where I draw the line, right? As if, I am all for finding alternative modes for local travel, but keeping in mind we all still need our cars for that regional, movement, and especially in a city like Boise, which is fairly compact.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I applaud what you're doing. I think it's really interesting stuff. And, we need to have fresh perspectives nowadays as our tastes change and as our cities expand and grow. And it's really becoming a challenge, especially in places like New York, to be able to maximize the space that we have for modes of travel and getting people from point A to point B in the most efficient way possible, because it's just not possible to build like it was 50 years ago. So we really have to figure out ways to make the most of the space that we have, and that's kind of that's going to be the challenge of the next few decades, I think, in a lot of places.
Absolutely, yep. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's the case in New York State, but certainly in Ada County, the Ada County Highway District is the single largest property owner or landowner in Ada County, right? And so it's like, what does that mean, right? And so, yeah.
Yeah. Doug has been very vigilant. He knows that you are in the process of clinching California and Nevada, and he wants to know what highways in Clinching and Nevada you've enjoyed the most so far. Is it a matter, and this is something...
So I'm going to plug California.
This is something I want to add to that, because, California and Nevada are very bipolar in a sense, because, especially in Nevada, like you'll have hundreds and hundreds of miles of nothing, and then all of a sudden you'll have this enormous suburban sprawl, urban center, and then you'll go back to having hundreds and hundreds of miles of nothing. And California is kind of the same way, where all of its population is crammed into just a few areas, and everything else is wilderness or desert. So I wonder, like, does it come down to the kind of road that it is that helps determine what your favorite is, like urban versus rural, or do you just kind of see something randomly and you're like, hey, that's pretty cool? You know what I mean?
Right. So I guess the way I'd answer that is, I'll answer it with my answer, which is to plug California California 33 as just a really cool highway, right? So, so California 33, it runs from Ventura on up to basically Tracy, which is just east of the Bay Area. So you're basically LA to the Bay Area, right? And it is such a diverse road. So, the southern half, the first few miles, you're on good old-fashioned California freeway. You've got Button Copy, you've got the SoCal deal, and then you climb up to Otay, and then past that, you're on what I was describing earlier, which is just like the insanely twisty mountain road with nobody on it. And then you come down towards Maricopa, Cuyama, and you're in sort of like the high desert, but not Central Valley farming situation. And then then you keep going down the hill, and you're kind of west of I-5. You're driving through like oil and pecans, right? And so that's kind of cool. And then you just I also really enjoy. Did you get that whole answer, or did I cut out there?
We got most of it. I think we left off at oil and pecans. I think you're on Highway 30.
Okay, yeah. So then you're So you're driving through oil and pecans, and then you keep going north, and you're in the Central Valley, and you've got whatever croplands going on in the Central Valley, but you've got the mountains right to the left of you. Again, if you're ever driving north-south in California and you want an alternative to 5 or 99, 33 is a good option that actually doesn't take all that much longer, assuming you can get out to Ventura in a reasonable period of time. But I like it because it's rural. If you're looking at urban California highways, I probably prefer the Bay Area to Los Angeles at this point, especially we all love old California Button Copy, and depending on where you are in the Bay Area or in Los Angeles, there's still some if you know where to look. But certainly going out to California 24 in that area, it's still a lot of Button Copy. You've got kind of a pretty drive through hills and mountains there. As far as Nevada goes, Nevada's a weird state. And I'm trying to figure out what the best way to answer it is. Because so much of Nevada looks exactly the same, right? You've got these north-south highways where you're just driving through basins, and you've got beautiful mountains on both sides of you, but they're all pretty interchangeable. And then the east-west highways, you're just kind of doing the same, except you're occasionally going over mountain passes to get from one basin to the next. I would say, from what I've seen in Nevada so far, and keep in mind, I haven't actually clinched a lot of Clark County yet. That's still on my radar, so I haven't clinched a lot of Las Vegas area roads. I really like the area north of Reno, out towards where Burning Man is. If you go out 446 and 447 out towards Gerlach, that's to me is northern Washoe County. It's just a really interesting area. It's a little bit different from the rest of Nevada. It's a little bit saltier, and you've got Pyramid Lake there, which is kind of another sort of basin lake, and that adds sort of a dimension of scenery that's different from interchangeable Nevada basin scenery.
Chef Jonathan wants to inquire about a couple of different states. Your favorite highways in Michigan and Georgia. Are those states that you've spent a good amount of time in overall, or are you pretty limited as far as those are?
So Georgia, I'm going to defer answering because I really don't know a whole lot about Georgia. Michigan, I have had the chance to drive across the UP, and I've come down and I've driven M66. I've clinched that. In my fairly limited experience in Michigan, I enjoy the Upper Peninsula a lot just because it reminds me a lot of McCall in terms of snow volumes and things things like that. So, certainly when you get up and some Michiganders, if there's any Michiganders in here, they're going to kill me for my pronunciation. The Keweenaw Peninsula, or however it's pronounced, is absolutely beautiful, and that's where the old embossed cutout US 41 shield is, and Michigan 203 and M28, and so that area is absolutely beautiful. Keweenaw, thank you, Wisconsin.
Yeah, there you go. I think, as we kind of start to wrap things up, I thank you very much for doing this. But I have one more thing I want you to bat around for me. You've been doing your site for 13 years, which I'm sure when you think about that, that's like, holy cow, that's a long time. But I want you to imagine that it is 13 years in the future. What do you want your legacy to be? What do you want your website to mean to you and to mean to others?
So, to be totally blunt, there's two forks on which this goes, right? One is that at some point I get married or something, right, and just forget about it. And it looks a lot like it does today, and it's sort of this idle, like, dormant mummy on the internet that maybe somebody looks at on Google sometimes, right? So that's one possibility, and I don't know that that's the ideal possibility. You ultimately in life, if you do whatever brings you the most happiness, right? The other option is to lean into making it something great, right? And what I've batted around the idea of, thus far it's been a one-man show. It's been something that, is really every single page on that website is something that I've put together, right? And I would love to figure out a way how to expand on that somehow. Not necessarily in the same way, but figure out how to maybe rebrand, take the Corco out of Corco Highways, call it something else, keep that part as something that I'm working on, but also add in more from other folks, right? And maybe that's the way to go, and to add, creative minds that can add, maybe some 21st century spin, find some aspiring Zoomers to help out, and figure out how to make it a portal. I would love to get a blog of some kind that talks about history and things like that going. I would love to get videos on there. Make it something, not in the vein of AA Roads, not necessarily the same thing, but in that light. So I don't know. There's right now the possibilities are endless. There's a very good chance in 13 years it will look exactly the same as it does now, just with twice as much content. Honestly, that's probably the most likely outcome. So who knows? I try not to think too much about the future.
But your legacy at this point must mean something to you. Like if you were to stop doing everything right now, you've got a heck of a body of work that a lot of people admire, and I gotta believe that means something to you, and that in the future when you look back many years from now, you're gonna want to say, you know what, that means something to me, that people got something out of what I did.
It's important to me. I would, as long as it's providing value to people, I think that's wonderful. I still enjoy doing it. I can also envision a world where I don't enjoy doing it anymore, right? And so I'm willing to allow whatever happens to happen, right? And what I can say for sure is I don't envision a situation where I would ever take it offline. I would say at this point, too much has been invested in it to do that. Like, even if I decided, all right, I'm going to retire from this life entirely, I can't imagine a world where I wouldn't at least maintain the website, right, as existing. But yeah, you never know. As I think we've all learned in the last few months, you never know what the world's going to throw at you, right? And so I'm reluctant to say too much about what I expect to happen, when I frankly have no idea.
Well, yeah, I mean, today is what, April 5th? And even 1 month ago, I don't think anybody was expecting it to be. I don't think anybody was expecting us to be sitting here on April 5th in the situation that we find ourselves in. Certainly, in my area here in New York, certainly we weren't thinking that this was going to blow up as much as it did. But no, you're right. I mean, I think, when I look at my body of work and I look at what I'm doing, the thing that's the most important to me is that I want to make sure that I'm still having fun doing it. And I think that's really the important thing.
Exactly.
Um, Really, that's what it comes back to. Because, this is, we're not getting paid to do this. This isn't our livelihood. This is what we
No,
do on the
no,
side, right? So if you're not enjoying
right.
what you're doing on the side, then what's the point of doing it? But and look, I don't know if you're the same way, but when I was in my teen years, I kind of cycled through a series of different hobbies, and like things would capture my interest and then they would fade away, and then other things would come in and take their place. And I'm at peace with the idea of one of these years waking up and realizing that roads really aren't that important to me anymore. And I don't know if you have the same thought on that, but I kind of am at peace with the idea of I'm enjoying it now. I don't know if I'll enjoy it 5 years from now or 10 years from now, but in the moment, I'm just going to enjoy it, and we'll see where it takes me.
No, I completely agree. And I would say, when I started driving Washington in 2007, if you would have told me in 13 years I'd still be going at it, I don't know what I would have told you. I probably would have said you're insane. That doesn't make any sense. Like, certainly you would have figured something else out by now, right?
Yeah.
and so that's great. But I do. I mean, I still love it. For me, it's fun, and if nothing else, it's meeting somebody new at like a party or something, and having them spit out some small town and Arizona, and being like, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about, right? And if nothing else, it's a neat party trick. But
Yeah.
but no, I love it. To me, it gives me an excuse to get out and go out and see things that people wouldn't see otherwise.
Yeah.
Listen to uh, explore. You got me?
I got you. You got me?
Okay, I wasn't sure if I cut out or not.
Yeah.
Not. I got a little laggy there.
Yeah, we got a little laggy, but that's all right.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think we've kind of come to the end of the journey here, and I thank you very much. You've been very generous with your time, and it was great talking to you and getting to know your backstory and your thought process with your website and all that. It's been a lot of fun. So, I don't know about the people in the live chat, but I've really enjoyed this time tonight. So, thank you very much for doing this. It's been great.
Yeah, no, and thank you, Dan. I think this is a great endeavor you've got going, and I look forward to seeing you interview other folks who maybe have a better or maybe more exciting to listen to ramble than I am for an hour and a half. So, hey, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, and you know what? We did have one last question. I did miss that. I apologize. Real quick, favorite Maryland highway as we start to wrap this up.
Oh, I have no idea. I'm not even sure I remember Maryland highway numbers. That I know Maryland well enough to throw out a number off the top of my head.
You're gonna have to repeat that answer because the lag monster came back.
Not found.
You still there? Uh-oh. I think we might have lost him. See that, Laura? You broke our live stream with that question. I knew there was some reason why I was not answering that. Hey, there he
Oh,
is.
did I go away again?
Are you still there? I
Back.
think we got you.
I'm back.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
you're gonna
did you hear
have
me
to.
say?
Yeah, you're gonna have to repeat your answer about favorite Maryland highway because it went bad right when I asked you that.
Okay, so my favorite Maryland highway, I'm going to decline to answer because I I don't think I know the Maryland highway system. I've only driven the ones like adjacent to the Delaware border, and they all have 3 digits. Most of them start with two, and I don't remember which ones are which. So I I probably can't give you a good
He's
answer.
punting the question. You hear that? All right. Well, anyway, Corco, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you very much. And if you're out there, people, in the live chat, and you want me to interview you, now's a good time to do it because it's not like we have anything else going on. So don't be shy. Step on up. Corco lived to
All
tell
right,
about it, so I'm sure the rest of you will do just fine.
perfect. Yeah, if I can do it, anybody can. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, the pleasure was mine, and it was great to have all you folks in the live chat. And Corco, again, you gave us some really great answers to a lot of interesting topics. And we'd love to have you on again in our future live presentations in the weeks ahead. So I'm sure you'll be seeing more of him as we go. But thanks a lot again, and we'll be in touch. Take care of yourself and keep doing what you're doing because you got a great site and you're doing some great work there.
Yeah, you too, Dan. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right, I'm gonna
All right. We'll see you guys. We'll see you guys later.